What's in a question? Maybe just about everything important. A smart and sharp question should strike up a more engaging conversation. So let's have ourselves a little discussion about, yes, indeed, you've heard it. You'll hear it again. Food shortages. The world's three biggest crop harvesting countries are, well, not meeting their quotas, and the consumers are feeling the pain. Good morning, Diane.
Good morning, Lena. Happy Tuesday.
Is it a Tuesday?
Yes.
Let that sink in.
It's already Tuesday.
All right, let's
go with that.
Let's shift our perspective.
Right.
It's already Tuesday.
Uh-huh. Oh. Monday has passed.
All right. I'll level with you. Let's extend our question of the day once more for all of our listeners.
All right. So question, what's happening to our food? With this rate of crop yield and soaring prices, we'll have to cut down our consumption of bread and snacks, which includes sour bread, cakes, muffins, donuts, to simple corn snacks like nacho chips.
Did you just name all of your food group?
Yes.
Okay, because I was like, that's not a really wide range.
Those are the things that I like, that I have to cut down because of the soaring prices.
Because it's expensive.
Right.
It's actually rather unfortunate that we're talking so much about inflation, and it's unavoidable, it seems.
Right.
It's such an important topic that we can't pass on. We really do feel the crunch when you go grocery shopping. So what's exactly happening on a bigger context?
So what's happening right now is that there's a growing concern that food shortages and the resulting foodflation, which is a mix of words of food and inflation, will hit hard the world. This comes amid the collapse of the food supply chain due to the prolonged war in Ukraine and rampant extreme weather conditions such as heat waves and drought. Some experts even predict that more than 300 million people around the world will starve this year because of this worsening foodflation.
So we complain in the first world countries about unaffordability, which is a serious problem, don't get me wrong. But in the more dire parts of the world where they're already scraping the bottom of the barrel, literally they don't have food.
No.
A while ago, our main writer Claudia actually brought up Ukraine, a country that holds a big grain power, and we're feeling the hunch of it everywhere because we're talking about not just grain, but animals and like, for example, poultry that feeds on grain. You know, these are animal feed that are certainly expensive.
So I was a bit surprised to hear how much grain they produce in Claudia's World News segment. Ukraine is the world's fifth largest wheat exporter, holding 8% of the entire world's exports, and the third corn exporter with a 13% share. Sunflower seed oil exports account for nearly half of the entire world's exports. So they are definitely a huge grain exporter.
Honestly, if you're not in the industry, I don't think supply chain is something that we talk about aggressively until something happens to the consumers, right? Now, because of the prolonged war that you just mentioned, the country won't be able to yield the same amount of grain for the foreseeable future.
Right, that's correct. The production of wheat and corn, Ukraine's main agricultural products, is expected to decrease by 35% and 54% respectively compared to the previous year. Exports of harvest grain were also blocked as Russian forces took control of ports in the Black Sea. And because more than 90% of Ukrainian grain is exported through the Black Sea ports, you can say that most of the crops are not getting exported to other countries, causing a supply blockage again. As the global supply chains has collapsed due to COVID-19 and the lockdown in China, it's expected that another shock will be inevitable in a situation where grain trade is already not smooth right now.
So this is the bigger problem. Experts forecast that the growing foodflation will linger for another 2 years at the very minimum, it seems.
Right. I mean, the future does not look bright. That's what makes it so gloomy for us. Global credit rating agency Standard & Poor's, so S&P, predicted in its recently released food crisis report that it will not be over in the short term and that the global food supply shock caused by the Russia-Ukraine war is expected to continue until 2024. So it's going to linger for about 2 years more. Even if the war is over, it will take time to restore the supply chain back to normalizing it. There is growing concern that food shortages and price increases will be prolonged as the abnormal climate overlaps with production declines.
So it's not just the war, it's the abnormal climate changes that is depleting supply overall in the first place. Now, like a really terrible ripple effect, a supply disruption in Ukraine is causing the world's supply chain shortage overall.
Right. So far this year, the price of July wheat on the Chicago Board of Trade Market soared by 42%. Corn and soybean prices rose roughly around 30% as well. So because of the war in Ukraine, and since the war began in the late February, Ukrainians abandoned their agricultural land and went to war, or they fled abroad.
Okay.
Even the remaining farmers in Ukraine missed the time to sow key crops such as wheat last spring due to heavy bombing. Like, how can you sow when there's a war going on?
Right.
So the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations estimates that 20 to 30% of Ukraine's agricultural land will remain unsown or unharvested this year.
And on top of that, because of the ongoing war, even the harvested crops are blocked from being exported from the ports.
Right. So like I mentioned a while ago, Ukrainian grain exports also fell sharply because Russia took control of the Black Sea port, which is a main export route for Ukrainian grain.
Right.
It occupies warehouses space without being exported, currently amounts to 22 million tons. This grain must be exported as soon as possible so that the newly harvested agricultural products can be fully stored.
Because what we forget about the
right.
supply chain is it's also about proper storage.
Right.
It's not as if they have unlimited factories
Right.
and these open warehouses.
Right. So the already harvest crops, they need to
Right.
send out to other countries in order to store newly cropped harvests.
Yeah.
So Russia said it could reopen some Ukrainian ports after international criticism of weaponizing food came. However, it gave a practically impossible condition that Ukraine had to clear landmines in the port area on its own.
That would easily allow Russians to take over.
Right.
Okay, so this has caused other countries to turn to food protectionism and stop exporting their grain produces because they'd have to, well, keep it for their own.
Right. In May, India, the world's second largest wheat producer, declared a ban on their wheat exports. And according to Bloomberg, at least 20 countries have put restrictions on their food exports, warning that food protectionism could push up prices even further.
Remember at the start of the pandemic, we had conversations about should we just grow most of it on our own?
Right.
I think that conversation is still happening in murmurs. I
Right.
mean, the supply chain and our dependency on it was so high, and it's not more. It couldn't be more evident than it is now. Not only the war in Ukraine, but as you've said, the other environmental factors are also affecting the crop exporting countries as well. So it's not just Ukraine.
Right. So La Nina, which is an anomaly where the water temperature in the eastern Pacific is lower than the normal for more than 5 months, has also emerged as another problem when it comes to yielding crops. So La Nina, which usually starts in the fall and weakens in the spring, is still strong this year. So as a result, the U.S. and Argentina, which are referred to as three largest breadbaskets in the world, along with Ukraine, are experiencing extreme drought. In the southwest of the U.S., a mega drought, which is an extra long drought, is occurring.
Drought.
Yeah. Which lasts more than 20 years.
Yeah.
The journal Nature Climate Change called it the worst drought in 1,200 years.
Wow.
And according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, world corn production is expected to reach 1.2 billion tons this month, which is down about 3% from the same period last year.
Okay.
World wheat production is also expected to decline for the first time in 4 years as Argentine harvests fall by about 10%.
So now, because the food chain is so closely knitted together, the price increases in grains must lead to price increases in other agriculture produces too. I mean, we talked about, namely, I guess, noodles, for
Right.
example, that would use a great deal of wheat in some cases. Chicken, poultry, for example, I
Right.
thought was kind of a weird connection because I never thought about chicken feed prior to this conversation, honestly, Diane.
Yeah. So the drought is also driving up meat prices because the feed to replace grass in pastures has also skyrocketed in price due to drought. Livestock farmers in Canada, the UK, and South America are considering the early slaughter of their livestock for meat because the grass in the pasture was not able to grow properly due to the drought.
Yeah.
And because flour is used a lot in our daily meals, the ingredient price increase has led to overall food prices for the consumer as well.
Okay.
Prices for dining out items that use wheat flour have risen particularly sharply. For example, according to the consumer agency Tally, jjajangmyeon in Seoul rose by 500 won to over 6,000 won, which is about $6. And kalguksu rose by 700 won to over 8,000 won.
And they're supposed to be like the affordable dishes.
Right.
Okay, so what are some solutions then to bring down foodflation? Because we need both short-term and long-term agendas, don't we?
Yes. As for South Korea, the government has recently said that it has decided to supply 200,000 tons of powdered rice by 2027 to replace 10% of the annual demand for flour because there's a big shortage of flour. They're saying that they're going to replace it with rice flour.
And we have, from what I understand and last I read, an oversupply of rice in the country. Then we can utilize what's left over to make something that's more efficient.
Yeah, so these powdered rice then would be made into bread or noodles, which can replace flour-made products.
Okay.
Also, in order to use rice flour to make products that can be consumed strategically, R&D and commercialization will be promoted in cooperation with large-scale customers such as food companies.
Okay, now the massive question.
Right.
The world, are there unified solutions to the food shortage and foodflation crisis?
They're definitely trying. The WTO's 12th Ministerial Conference will take place on 12th to 15th June 2022. So it's happening right now at WTO headquarters in Geneva after 5 years of hiatus due to the pandemic.
Okay.
Ministers from across the world will have the opportunity to review the functioning of the multilateral trading system, make general statements, and take action on the future work of the WTO. Especially for this year, food security and supply chain stabilization will be discussed to minimize the foodflation.
Is this time for us to all cut down on bread?
Yes, probably. Starting with me.
Thanks, Diane, for a thorough update. We'll speak to you again tomorrow.
I'll see you tomorrow.
We have Tuesdays for tomorrow coming up with Joe next.